So good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I believe my remit is to speak on my personal relationship with simplicity within my own world. So simplicity, I would say for me, has been a magnet throughout my life. But of course, we often don't realise these things until our life begins to unfold in different ways. So even as a child, I can remember gravitating towards places of solitude and tranquility, and obviously churches or places of worship were ideal. And I have to say, I particularly enjoyed them when they were empty, when there was no one else there. That's what I really loved. And I also remember as a young girl being on holiday with my mother in Italy. And we must have been touring some monastery or church. I don't remember what it was. I was very young. And she pointed up to the top level of this building. And there was a woman dressed in white walking very slowly. And she said, "Look up there. These are nuns, Carmelite nuns, and they're in silence." And something very powerful within my whole being just understood how beautiful the simplicity of this was. So there was something in me just being pulled towards that. But of course, life carries you along, doesn't it? And I think my feelings of longing for solitude, simplicity, got kind of lost in a career, bringing up 3 children, big house, hectic social life, the way it does. And I think it wasn't until my children were growing up and making their own way in life that I began to find the spaciousness and the clarity to re-begin to look at what I really wanted in life, where I was really being drawn to. So I started going to some meditation classes and some Buddhist events. So I had the opportunity to meet with some nuns and monks. And I was overwhelmed with the simplicity of how they dressed, with the simplicity of how they spoke. They said what they needed to say and no more, the simplicity of their practice, and the way they moved in life. I was overwhelmed by this. But I couldn't see any way whatsoever of my moving into that world. It seemed impossible. And I think that's what we often do, is we see a world that we want to move in and be in, but we consider it impossible. And of course it's not. So things change in life, and whenever my marriage broke down, I realised I was in a position to make some choices in life about where I really wanted to be. Now, something happened at that point in my life that was instrumental in driving me forward to make the biggest decision of my life, which was to become an ordained Buddhist nun. And I will share with you a very personal story because I think it has intrinsic value in what we're talking about today. So the story goes like this. I met someone. I met a wonderful, wonderful person, a lovely gentleman who was, you could say, Mr. Perfect. Caring, intelligent, charming, deeply spiritual, and unbelievably wealthy. So this gentleman introduced me to a lifestyle that you could only dream about, something from the movies. And we had an amazing holiday filled with every luxury you could possibly think of. And at the end of this holiday, when I was offered this lifestyle for the rest of my life, I knew I had to make some decisions. So I had been very happy, but I remembered a happiness that I had experienced a couple of months before. I had decided to go on retreat for a weekend retreat into our retreat centre, which was then way up in the Forest of Ay in the Borders, very remote. And my son had just completed a 4-month silent retreat in this same place in a hut, in a simple hut. So I asked if I could do my weekend retreat in the same hut, because in the interim period no one had used it. So I felt I could experience some of his energy, or at least what he'd experienced there in that weekend. So this hut was absolute simplicity. There was a bed, a little table, a chair, and a little sink that didn't work very well. Totally simple. Now, in that weekend, I experienced a happiness that I couldn't put into words. So I thought about these two different types of happiness. One of them was completely dependent on all the external circumstances, on the lovely gentleman, on the beautiful environment, on the fabulous music, the wine, all the luxury, everything dependent on that. Things to be enjoyed, but that happiness is dependent on that. Now, the happiness I'd experienced in the hut was totally pure and simple and had come from an inner peace inside. So I made my choice. I made my choice there and then. So shortly afterwards, I was ordained as a Buddhist nun. And virtually overnight, I walked away from the long hair, the clothes, the makeup, the jewellery, the razzmatazz, the big house, everything in my life, to embark on the simple way of living. And that was 12 years ago. And I can honestly say I've never, ever been happier. And in fact, in my role as a teacher of Buddhist philosophy, I rejoice when I'm giving a particular teaching on how to refine a clarity of mind, a spaciousness of mind from which we can actually make these life-changing decisions and move forward into what is truly a meaningful world for us. Now, before I leave you, I'd like to tell you a little story about a young girl who was coming to my classes. One evening, a lady phoned me and said, can I bring my 11-year-old daughter to your classes? So I said, well, look, sometimes the classes can be quite profound. I don't know. It depends how mature she is. And she said, oh, she's very mature. I'm sure she'll be absolutely fine. So this little girl called Gail came along to my classes week after week after week. And she was totally absorbing all the material and clearly loving it. And at times when her mum and the other adults, the grown-ups, were reacting with a bit of puzzlement and a bit of like, this is a bit complex, how can I put this teaching into my life, how can I practice it? She was just absorbing it. And I would say to her, Gail, are you getting this? And she'd say, yes, Machig, it is so, so simple. Because at that age she hadn't yet adopted this ability to fill her mind with so much stuff, to clutter it and to bring complications in that were totally unnecessary. And she became one of the best teachers we've ever had. So thank you very much. That's my story of simplicity. Thank you.